oh my God, how could you possibly live up to Marvel's or Kevin Feige's Marvel when you are so hamstrung by having to make Star Wars?
All you got is this little Star Wars franchise.
Yeah. And so she continues. I didn't realize that her answer continues. Then there you have a brand that's this expansive. You're also, and this is something we work very hard at, you try to find different entry points for different generations, because that's what Star Wars has always been. It's a generational brand, and we want to sustain that, and we work hard to sustain that, and you fail. So George gave us the gift of storytelling being across a lot of different genres, and that gives us a lot of opportunity to try things. What we've really enjoyed about the streaming space is that we've been able to experiment. It's harder to do that in the movie space. And now I think that's why it feels so good to be able to move into a Mandalorian movie, as we're coming off of 3 seasons of a very successful show. We've built an audience for that, and we gave the young audience an opportunity to enter Star Wars at a different place and not feel like you have to have seen everything. It can become their Star Wars, and that, I think, is the fun storytelling challenge.
My kids loved Mandalorian season 1 and 2. We would wake up every day of it as it was released. I'd wake them up an hour early. We'd come down here and we'd watch the next episode of Mandalorian. They didn't care about season 3, so they lost that generation.
Well, I was about to say that, like, 3 successful series. I almost editorialized as I read. I was like, did people watch season 3? I did.
Yeah, the season 3 was just really a downgrade.
I mean, if the point here is, there's that old phrase, quantity and quality, and they tried to do with Star Wars what they did with the MCU: saturation of different products, a whole load of different stuff, trying to, a bit like Canon, throwing loads of things at the wall and hoping that something's going to stick. I mean, she says about experimenting. People make experimental films for art house film festivals. This is Star Wars, man.
Right. Yeah.
It's right. I keep saying this. It's not that hard to get right. You know, you just got to have a main protagonist that people relate to, a sense of adventure. They need to be somebody who's got weaknesses. You know, they're probably pretty green because the audience will relate to that, and then they're going to find their way through a series of adventures and make new friends and go up against the bad guys and yada yada yada, and then maybe some romance along the way. These are all basic things that are not that hard to get right, unless you're Kathleen Kennedy, apparently. So the generational thing, it just brings me back to the same point I made earlier, which is the story principles across whatever generation are still the same. And whilst I get what she's saying here, she's trying to answer quite cleverly, and she knows how to use her words. I'll give her that. And she's not wrong in saying about the difference between streaming and movies. But if they'd done it right, what they would have done is they would have doubled the Star Wars or tripled the Star Wars fan base, and you would have this army of people off the back of several successful Star Wars television franchises of all ages chomping at the bit for when the new movies came out. What we've ended up with is some TV shows that are okay, and some that are not bad, several that are very so-so, some that are terrible, and some really average movies and very poor decision making. I mean, she has to, my friend said this in his video, she has to take responsibility for the folly that was the last trilogy. Why on earth would you start a trilogy of movies and not sit down and have a planning meeting and saying, these are the characters we're going to have. We've got 3 actors, some of whom might die soon. So why don't we shoot all of their scenes first and get them locked in? And then we can have all of these new characters, and these are going to be the arcs for the new characters. And let's film these movies back to back, but this is the story, regardless of who.
We talked about that last time.
Of course.
I mean, that's a massive mistake.
It is.
I could go on about it, but I won't. And
well, it's egregious.
The buck stops with her where that mistake is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, and it's the biggest mistake of all, because that's where it all went wrong from the very beginning.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at what she's saying in that, you know, it almost sounds like she doesn't acknowledge that there is any failures in any of the shows.
I noticed that.
And I think that's where, I mean, I know she can't, but she can't, you know, it just feels very like unaware of stuff, not
totally
self-aware.
Totally
Yeah.
out of touch.
Totally, completely out of touch with the fans and what's going on. Like,
Well, what's funny is she says we actually built an audience for that. She's talking about Mandalorian. And I would argue, and keep in mind, Mandalorian came out in 2019 after the Rise of Skywalker belly flopped in the trilogy. And no one went to go see Solo, and the Rise of Skywalker flopped. And then here comes Mandalorian on streaming. She didn't build an audience. The audience that went like Mando was the audience that felt betrayed by the trilogy and felt that Mando was a return to form.
yeah.
I
So
think
it
it's
was
an
the
excellent
old,
point.
yeah, it's the old audience simply coming back. You didn't build that audience.
Yeah, that was me too. I came back to watch Mando.
Right.
People came
Yeah.
back to watch Mando because they heard about it. So okay,
Yeah.
so
I think
Deadline
she's
says,
go ahead.
so Deadline says you've got a long resume of big movies. Compared to that, how much tougher is the challenge of so much public scrutiny and second guessing by the rabid fan base?
Oh, those terrible fans.
Oh
It's-
my God.
It's not like
We're
how
rabid. We're
terrible
rabid.
is it
We're
to
rabid
be you?
dogs
How
now.
terrible is it to be you? Again, it's not uncommon to develop a project with big names who fall out when visions don't align, but they get reported as a big implosion. Kennedy says, what you just said, though, is so interesting to me, Mike, because that is the development. It doesn't matter if you're doing Star Wars or anything else. That's troubling. What's troubling and frustrating is that our development gets scrutinized. And I don't know any other production company where their development gets scrutinized like that. I can.
Oh.
Amazon. It's
Yeah.
very, like with Rings of Power and stuff
Sony.
like that. I mean, I
Like
oh my God.
everybody gets, if you're in the public, you get scrutinized.
Yeah. It's very hard for anything to happen within Star Wars without some aspect of it becoming public before you even want it to become public. So I guess
I think
managing
that's probably true. That
Yeah, we can
comment.
highlight that.
Yeah.
yeah, right here. Yeah,
She's
okay,
talking.
that's true.
She's
But
talking
I
from the
mean, okay, maybe it is true to an extreme with Star Wars, but something like House of the Dragon, I mean, I'm sure also has
Star Trek.
Star Trek,
Yeah.
probably probably not Star Trek so much anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean does seem to be something that also happens with big IPs. So like Harry Potter in its prime, like I mean they went to a tremendous amount of trouble to try to hide, Harry Potter leaks. I guess managing the message in some way is also quite a challenge because of course not every single thing we put in development we are going to make. Yes, as has been the case.
We get
That's
that.
not unusual. We want to make these things that we feel are the best. We want to make those things that as time passes feel relevant to what the audience is responding to. So there's constant discussion around that. So yeah, that's a tricky one because a lot of the scrutiny around Star Wars and the negativity has been about development. Of course, we're going to develop lots of different things with an understanding that not everything gets made. I don't feel like they put it forward like that.
Yeah, I don't know what she's talking about. She's actually, it sounds like she's making a separate excuse for why all of her announcements didn't pan out.
It does.
Yeah.
Do other people do that? Were there a long list of like Marvel movies that were put into, like, hey, we have this in development and then never appeared?
No.
Like, I don't think that's the way things typically go.
Well, I mean,
Warner Brothers has done it a lot.
to be fair to Kennedy, it just as a general rule of principle in the film industry, there are probably, for every film that gets made, there's probably 20 that go into development that don't, just across the board. I've spent more days and hours and years in my life trying to get money for one film project or another that's being developed with this famous actor or that famous actor that never actually happens because of XYZ.
Yeah,
So-
Lance, and I know you're right. I think the difference, or the thing I'm thinking is different, is that because there's all these ideas that they're sitting around in a drawer somewhere, or, production falls through. The difference I think with her is they make these big announcements.
Yeah.
Don't those other projects kind of not get announced? It's like a pregnancy. You don't say anything until a certain number of months.
Yeah, I mean, typically, Pegasus Bridge, which was my big one, that project did get announced before we had all the money in the bank, but we had enough interest to the degree that we were confident it was going to happen, so we went public, and the interest that we got went absolutely bananas about the film, because in that genre of World War II, it's a it's a big topic. It's like D-Day. Everybody's very interested in anything to do with D-Day, so you've got a fan base there that are very similar in terms of the level of scrutiny that they'll ask about what's happening and comments, and also you get haters as well, and we had all of that. So it's not uncommon to try and, as the guy that was on earlier said, it's not uncommon to make announcements to drum up interest, because if the press says, I'll tell you, for example, what happened with Pegasus when it went to the trades that Pegasus was happening. Literally the next day, we got a phone call from Henry Cavill's agent. Is there anything on Pegasus for Henry? He wants to know.
Ooh, wow, that's pretty awesome.
That's nice.
And that's because people start talking in the industry, and by that time we had Rupert Penry Jones attached to the movie as well, and I think 2 or 3 other people. So word was already going around that the industry, this project's happening, and it is a chicken and egg thing. It's like you're trying to get a big name attached. You're trying to get your Tom Hardy or your Henry Cavill or whoever attached to your film, but you need to get them to read the script, or you need to get them to sign what's called an LOI, a letter of intent, meaning they have read the script, they are intending to do the movie, so your investors know they can put money in safety, and that goes in an escrow account until things get a green light and all the rest of it. It's a little bit.
So you are saying that this is more common than I'm thinking.
It is more common than you're thinking, and you need to think about the level that I was just talking about. Was my film, which was a big film for me, a £9 million movie. It would have been a life-changing paycheck. It would have paid for a house, all kinds of things. But and you're talking here on this level at billions of dollars, right? So if you think the same level of excitement, but instead of between, you know, me dealing with agents and our production company and that kind of level, you're talking about massive studio executives and people who've got hundreds of stars available on their books. CAA are going to be calling, okay, who can we get on the Star Wars project? Because it's money out the front door and in the back door. It's a business model, isn't it? You know, every time they've announced that they're developing something, if 500 million has been allocated to studio to develop Star Wars projects over the next 5 years, well, as the producer, you're going to want to try and get as big a slice of that pie as your paycheck as possible. So if you're developing 25 projects, that's 25 paychecks, whether the projects happen or not. Every time something goes into development, there's usually some development money from somewhere. Otherwise, no one's working on it. Therefore, it's not in development. The script can't be developed if no one's writing it, right? So even a pitch deck, there might not be a script, but there might be a pitch deck. Even the poster, you know, the poster for Rogue Squadron, somebody designed that somewhere. That was paid for by development money for that project, right? So someone probably has designed some concept posters. There's probably some art work, concept art for Rogue Squadrons, and I'm sure there are some stills with, you know, X-Wings and all the rest of it, all the stuff that AI is doing for them now. So that would have been paid for out of the development money to somebody to package that product.
So you're saying that announcements and the in development tag, this creates a pool of money, and then the professional anglers come in and try to get some of that money, and then if you have someone like Kathy pushing it out there, it's building momentum.
It's commonly referred to as, the tactic is your production slate. So it's always seen as very favorable that if your production company is announcing your slate of films, and Retro will know this, Canon Films did this all the time. They went to Cannes, they would announce 20 films that they were doing. They had posters, sometimes they had stars attached, and loads of those films didn't get made. Look at the Albert Poon Spider-Man film. They had the rights to that for 5 years, and they had posters done and visuals and everything, but it never got made because they went bust. But if you have a production slate, you go to Cannes with your production slate. So let's say you're Star Wars or Lucasfilm, you go to Lucasfilm with Cannes, you've got 20 posters for 20 different Star Wars Lucasfilm shows. Your investors in Cannes are going to get very excited. Star Wars is an established brand. Yes, please, we want to invest in that one. Here's some money. Great. We're going to spend some of that money on developing that show.
So is Kathy basically taking Star Wars and drumming and basically saying, I have the money, hang with me and I'll make you rich? Is that kind of her shtick?
Well, I can't speak to, I would not want to speak to the mind of someone as complex as Kathleen Kennedy on any given day of the week. But
fair enough.
Any producer worth their salt who has their hands on the reins of an IP, who's in charge of producing projects for that IP, will produce a slate of projects with their name as attached as producer to all those projects. And on every one of those projects, whether that project goes to fruition or not, there will be a paycheck for them somewhere because they're the producer.
Yeah.
So you're making sure that a big chunk of the development money goes towards you. Now, I need to caveat that quickly by saying there are some producers who work very hard for that kind of paycheck. They will develop a slate of 5 films, and we're talking like the smaller level companies here, maybe like Lionsgate or somewhere like that. A producer might be in charge of producing a slate of 5 films for Lionsgate, and they may work really damn hard to get 5 really big actors attached to those 5 films, put together a budget, get the script to the best state. It is impossible. It's all the stuff you do before you get the green light. That's the development phase. And there are producers that work really hard at that. Gail Ann Hurd is one of them. I've had lots of conversations with her about projects that didn't happen for whatever reason, that she spent, the best part of a year on her life trying to get made. This is what hardworking, hands-on producers do. I think Kennedy's in this kind of weird state of fairyland where she just thinks everything will happen because it's Star Wars and she is who she is. I don't know. Your previous guest said she's very hands off.
Yeah, the report.
That makes a lot of sense to me, that she's making a lot of announcements at the top level, just like waving a wand around without really knowing whether any of these things are actually going to happen, without the scripts properly in place, without the proper development done for the projects, and then not really doing the hands-on work, the proper hours, the getting dirty in the trenches, we like to call it, to make sure those projects they go through to fruition and they're produced to some degree of high standard. I mean, she clearly wasn't on the reins of the Acolyte. That's what he says. She was barely present there. I don't know anybody I've got about 12 friends that worked on the Acolyte, some behind the production and some on camera. I think only one of them met her, from what I remember.
Yeah, the word is that she's not very involved and will come in heavy-handed late in the game. That's why she'll fire a director after 90% of the movie is filmed, and then